He hadn't seen his daughter since she was 1 year old, until she showed up at his office holding 2 babies and said, "My brothers need milk." It was a cloudy Thursday afternoon in New York City, and James Harper was just stepping out of his sleek black SUV in front of his corporate headquarters. As the CEO of one of the most powerful real estate firms on the East Coast, his days were typically packed with meetings, negotiations, and numbers. He was dressed sharply in a light gray suit, his tie undone slightly as he checked his phone, scrolling through unread messages. The wind tugged at his jacket as he approached the entrance of the building, nodding briefly to the doorman. Then he saw her. A little girl stood just a few steps from the revolving doors, holding holding someone, in her small arms. 2 tiny bundles wrapped in matching blue blankets. Her hair was dark, like his, long and slightly tangled, and her big blue eyes stared at him with a strange mixture of recognition and fear. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She wore a bright yellow t-shirt, a blue skirt that looked worn at the edges, and shoes that didn't quite match. Her arms trembled from the weight of the babies she carried, but she didn't put them down. At first, James assumed it was some tragic misunderstanding. A lost child? A desperate situation? A prank, even? But the moment she opened her mouth, the world around him stopped. "My brothers want milk," she said quietly, almost apologetically. James froze. For a second, he couldn't speak. His heart dropped to his stomach as he looked into her face again. Something shifted in him, something that had been buried for 6 long years. The last time he had seen his daughter, she had been barely a year old, reaching for him with tiny fingers as her mother walked away without a word. He had spent years wondering where they went, searching at first, then grieving, assuming they had built a new life without him. And now this little girl stood in front of him, unmistakably familiar. The same eyes. The same shape of the mouth. Even her stubborn posture reminded him of the baby he once rocked to sleep. He blinked, trying to find his voice. You're my daughter?" he asked, the words sticking in his throat. She looked at him, not with confusion, but with something closer to defiance. "Mom said you died," she said matter-of-factly, her grip tightening around the babies. "But I saw your face on the side of a building. I thought maybe it wasn't true." James didn't know what to say. His thoughts were racing. Was this really her? Could it be? And who were the babies she held so protectively? Her brothers? His sons? The questions made his head spin, but he knew one thing for certain: the little girl in front of him was not just someone's child. She was his. People began to slow down on the sidewalk, glancing over at the strange scene unfolding outside the pristine glass office building. James stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Let's get you inside," he said gently. "You and your brothers. We'll go to the hospital, make sure you're all okay." The girl looked skeptical. "Why would you help us?" James hesitated, then crouched slightly to meet her eyes. "Because I think I'm your dad." She studied him. Her lip quivered, just for a second, then she looked down at the sleeping infants in her arms. Finally, she gave a tiny nod. "Okay," she whispered. And just like that, James Harper's entire life changed. James helped the girl into the back seat of his car, gently placing the twin infants into soft blankets on the leather seats. He buckled them in with more care than he had used in years, his hands slightly trembling. She sat silently beside them, her little legs barely hanging over the edge, her arms folded tightly across her chest as if to guard herself. He didn't ask her name yet. He wasn't ready to hear it out loud, not until he was sure. Instead, he focused on driving, weaving through the busy Manhattan streets, his mind racing faster than the car. He kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She stared out the window, her expression unreadable. He wanted to ask her so many things, but he knew not to push. She had shown up out of nowhere with 2 babies in her arms, believing her father had died, and now she was in a stranger's car because he had offered her milk and safety. It was too much for anyone, let alone a 6-year-old. And yet, she sat there in complete silence, like someone who had already lived through more than she ever should have. Finally, as they stopped at a red light, James cleared his throat. "Do they have names?" he asked softly, glancing again at the bundles. She turned her eyes to him. "Daniel and David," she replied without hesitation. "Daniel's the one who cries when he's hungry. David always goes second." Her voice was low, like someone reciting instructions rather than sharing something personal. He nodded slowly. "They're lucky to have you." The girl didn't respond, just went back to looking out the window. James gripped the steering wheel tighter. They arrived at the hospital 15 minutes later. It wasn't the closest, but it was the one he trusted, private, efficient, quiet. He carried one baby, she carried the other, and together they walked through the sliding glass doors. Nurses looked up in confusion as the powerful CEO of Harper & Blake, someone they recognized from business news channels, walked in carrying a baby and accompanied by a mysterious child. The attending pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Evans, was paged immediately. James had known her for years through charity work and trusted her more than anyone. Within minutes, they were in a private room. The babies were placed on warmed beds, checked by gentle hands, fed, and stabilized. They were slightly dehydrated, underfed, but otherwise healthy. James sat in the corner of the room, watching the little girl sit on the chair with her feet tucked underneath her. She didn't look at the toys offered by the nurse or the juice box placed beside her. Her attention was focused only on the babies. The way her eyes followed every movement, the way she stiffened every time one of them cried, it was like watching a soldier guard her last post. When the babies had been fed and were asleep, Dr. Evans stepped out with James into the hallway. "She said her name is Lily," the doctor said quietly. "Is she?" James swallowed hard. "I think so. I lost her 6 years ago. Her mother left and disappeared. I haven't seen her since." Dr. Evans's eyes softened. "Do you want to do a DNA test?" He nodded. "Yes. As soon as possible. And one for the twins. I don't know anything for sure." She gave a slight nod. "I'll take care of it." Back inside the room, Lily was sitting exactly as they had left her. When James walked in, she didn't look up. Her face was expressionless. "Lily," he said carefully, crouching down so he was eye level with her, "I want to make sure you're okay. I want to help your brothers, and I want to help you too." Her voice was flat. "You said you were my dad." James felt a sharp ache in his chest. "I said I think I am. I haven't seen you since you were a baby. Your mom left. I didn't know where you were. I didn't know if you were alive." "She said you died in a crash," Lily replied, her gaze still fixed on the babies. "That's why I didn't look for you. I thought you were gone forever." He didn't know how to respond to that. What do you say to a child who believed you were dead? "I didn't die," he said finally. "I'm here. I'm real. And if you'll let me, I want to prove that you're not alone anymore." Lily slowly turned to him then. There was doubt in her eyes. A wall of it. And hurt too, so much hurt for someone so young. "Are you going to take us away?" she asked, her voice trembling for the first time. James shook his head. "No. I'm going to take care of you. And I want to find out the truth. But we'll do it together. No surprises. No lies." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, she whispered, "Okay." It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something. A beginning. The next morning, the hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional gurgle from one of the babies sleeping nearby. The early sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting a warm golden hue across the floor. James had barely slept. He had spent most of the night sitting on the small couch in the corner of the room, watching over the children, over his children, perhaps. His mind was in chaos. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's face from the day before, her cautious stare, her tired voice, her arms wrapped around the twins like a shield. Lily had fallen asleep in the armchair next to the baby's crib, one leg curled under her, her head leaning against the side of the chair. She didn't look like a child should look. There was no peace in her sleep. Her face twitched sometimes, as though even her dreams didn't offer rest. James looked at her and felt something deep and painful stir inside him. Guilt. Guilt so sharp it made his chest ache. He hadn't left her. He hadn't abandoned her. But she had lived as if he had. That was something he couldn't ignore. Dr. Evans entered the room quietly, holding a clipboard in one hand and a small sealed envelope in the other. She gave James a look that said she was ready to speak, but her eyes flicked toward the sleeping girl, and she kept her voice low. "The test results are back," she said, and James stood up immediately, crossing the room to meet her just outside the door. In the hallway, she handed him the envelope. He stared at it for a second before opening it. The document was clear, precise, clinical in its wording. The child known as Lily Harper matched his DNA with 99.9% certainty. The twins, Daniel and David, were not biologically his. That didn't surprise him. But what stunned him was how quickly, how instinctively, he had come to care for them anyway. "She's yours," Dr. Evans said softly. "There's no doubt." James stared at the paper for a moment longer, then slowly folded it and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He felt a strange rush of emotion, relief, disbelief, sorrow, joy, all mixing into something so overwhelming that he couldn't speak for a full minute. "She's been through more than most adults," the doctor continued, her voice filled with quiet concern. "She told the nurse a little more while we were doing the test. Said their mother left a few days ago. Just left them all in the apartment. She tried to feed the babies with water and sugar. Walked to the store to ask for milk. No one helped her. Then she saw your face on a billboard." James blinked. "What?" "She saw your photo on one of those luxury development ads near Times Square. You were standing in front of a new high-rise. That's how she knew your name wasn't dead." His chest tightened. The idea of his daughter wandering through the city, carrying two infants, searching for food and chasing the face of a man she'd been told was gone, it was almost too much to bear. "I need to talk to her," he said, his voice low. Dr. Evans nodded. "She's awake now." When James walked back into the room, Lily was sitting up. She wasn't holding the babies, but her eyes were on them as if she could protect them by will alone. She looked at James warily, sensing the change in the air. "Did you find out?" she asked without preamble. James sat on the edge of the couch, not too close, but close enough to be near. "Yes. I did." Lily nodded slowly. "So? Are you really my dad?" "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "You're my daughter, Lily. You always have been." For a second, her expression didn't change. Then something cracked just slightly in her eyes, relief, fear, confusion, it flickered and vanished just as quickly. "But what about the boys?" she asked, already shifting the attention away from herself. "They need food. They need a home." "We'll get them everything they need," James said gently. "We'll find a way, Lily. But first, I need you to know that you're not alone anymore. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Lily stared at him for a long time. Her fingers twisted together in her lap, her mouth pulled into a tight line. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost inaudible. "Mom said you died. She told me after she had the babies. I didn't believe her at first. But then she showed me a newspaper. I was little. I didn't know how to check anything. James felt a sharp sting behind his eyes, but he didn't let it show. I didn't die, Lily. I never stopped hoping I'd find you. I just didn't know where to look. She looked away. I didn't know where to look either. Until I saw your face. There was a long silence between them, filled only by the quiet breathing of the sleeping babies. Then James stood and walked over to her. He held out his hand, not to force her, but to offer something. I know you don't have any reason to trust me yet, he said quietly. But if you let me, I want to show you that you can. She looked at his hand, then at his face, and for a moment it seemed like she might retreat again. But instead, she slowly reached out and took it. It was the smallest of gestures, but it was everything. James didn't leave the hospital for the rest of the day. He cancelled every meeting, ignored calls from business partners, and asked his assistant to handle everything without bothering him unless it was life or death. The man who had built a reputation for being unreachable and relentlessly focused on success was now spending hours sitting beside a small girl and 2 infants, feeding them, comforting them, and trying to understand how his life had taken such an unexpected, irreversible turn. Lily remained cautious, even after hearing the truth. She never asked to be held, never reached for his hand again, but she also didn't pull away when he helped her open a juice box or gently brushed her hair out of her eyes. She stayed near the babies constantly, even insisting on changing their diapers despite the nurse's offers to help. It became clear to James very quickly that Lily had become their caregiver out of necessity, not choice. The way she moved, the way she watched everyone who came near the boys, it was protective, almost parental. That realization hit him harder than any business failure ever had. She had raised them, at least for as long as their mother had been gone, and probably even before that. James sat down next to her on the edge of the hospital bed that afternoon while the twins were napping. He brought a tray with sandwiches and soup, but Lily barely touched hers. She just looked at the food, her hands in her lap. How long was she gone before you came to find me? He asked gently, not wanting to press too hard but needing to understand. Lily shrugged, her gaze fixed on the floor. She was sick a lot. She'd sleep all day. Sometimes not come home for days. I learned how to mix formula when the babies were little. Then we ran out. I tried water, but they kept crying. One night, she just didn't come back. James felt his throat tighten. The idea of a 6-year-old trying to figure out how to feed 2 infants alone, waiting for a mother who had already emotionally vanished, was unbearable. Did you tell anyone? A neighbor? Someone at school? He asked. I stopped going to school when the babies were born, she said plainly. I couldn't leave them alone. The lady downstairs yelled at me for crying too much. One man gave me crackers once. But no one wanted to get involved. James pressed his hand against his mouth, trying to hold back the frustration boiling inside. It wasn't just Emily's disappearance that had hurt Lily, it was the silence from the world around her. The way people had looked the other way. You shouldn't have had to do any of that, he finally said, his voice raw. That's not what a child should live through. Lily didn't respond. She just shifted her weight on the bed and looked over at the twins. They're good babies, she whispered. They don't deserve to be alone. James looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone far older than her years. A child who had stopped being a child too soon. He realized that winning her trust wouldn't be about grand promises or gifts. It would be about showing up, every single day, and proving he meant every word. That night, James asked the hospital staff to bring in a cot so he could sleep in the room with them. They protested. He was, after all, a high-profile public figure, but he insisted. He lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, watching the moonlight stretch across the floor, thinking about what kind of life Lily must have lived while he'd been in boardrooms and luxury hotels. He thought about the moments he had missed, her first steps, her first words, her first scraped knee, her first fear. He would never get those years back. But he could be there now. He could fight for her now. In the quiet darkness, one of the babies stirred and whimpered softly. Lily sat up instantly, almost before James could even react, and crossed the room to soothe him. She moved automatically, like it was second nature. James rose as well and came to stand beside her. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," he whispered, reaching to help. "Let me take care of them too." Lily hesitated for just a second, then handed him the baby. He took the tiny boy into his arms. "Daniel," he thought, and rocked him gently. The baby quieted after a moment, nestling into James's shoulder. Lily watched him, her expression unreadable. But she didn't take the baby back. That was enough. For now. 3 days passed. James hadn't returned to his office, not even once. His assistant kept forwarding urgent emails, board members called to demand explanations, and one investor threatened to pull out of a deal unless James made a public appearance. But none of it mattered to him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about buildings or deadlines. He was thinking about Lily. About the twins. About Emily, and where she might be. Every night, he lay awake wondering how things had gone so far off course without him ever knowing. How had he not seen it coming? How had she disappeared so completely? Dr. Evans had arranged for the hospital's social services department to assist, and though James appreciated the help, he quickly made it clear that he would take full responsibility for the children. Legally, Lily was his daughter, and he now had temporary custody granted within hours due to his status and the emergency circumstances. As for the twins, the paperwork was more complicated. They were not his biological sons, but there was no one else. Their mother had vanished, no extended family had come forward, and Lily had made it clear that wherever she went, they would go too. That, for James, wasn't even a question. He had already made up his mind. On the 4th morning, just as he was preparing to take the children home from the hospital, Dr. Evans approached him with an envelope in her hand. She looked tired, but there was something intense in her eyes, something James couldn't quite name until she spoke. "One of the nurses remembered something," she said, handing him the envelope. "Apparently, a woman came into the ER almost 2 weeks ago. No ID, disoriented, high fever, severe pneumonia. She left before being fully treated." The nurse didn't think much of it, until she saw Lily. They matched her face to a photo. James took the envelope slowly and opened it. Inside was a printed photograph, slightly grainy, clearly taken from hospital security footage. His breath caught. It was Emily. Her face was thinner than he remembered, her eyes sunken, her skin pale and sweaty, but there was no mistaking it. His heart lurched painfully in his chest. She had been there. She had been so close. And still, she hadn't called him. "Do you know where she went?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "We traced her to a shelter across town. She checked in under a false name and left again a few days later. But we think we can find her. One of our social workers is already reaching out." James stood there for a long time, staring at the photo in his hand. He couldn't stop thinking about what she must have felt in those moments. Fear? Shame? Regret? She had been sick. She had been alone. And yet, she hadn't trusted him enough to reach out, not even when she knew she was leaving their daughter and 2 newborns behind. The pain of that realization struck deep, almost deeper than the initial abandonment. Later that afternoon, when the children were finally discharged and James brought them to his penthouse apartment, Lily barely said a word. She looked out the window of the car the entire ride, her small fingers clutching the strap of her seatbelt. James didn't push her. He knew she was holding too much inside. His home was large, modern, full of quiet and space and light. It had been designed to impress clients, to entertain guests, to reflect success. It had never been meant for children. But now, as he carried one of the twins through the glass front doors, followed by a silent Lily with the other in her arms, the entire apartment felt like a blank page. Something new. Something waiting to be rewritten. James had a crib delivered before they arrived, along with baby supplies, clothes, bottles, diapers, toys, and everything else the hospital staff had recommended. Still, Lily insisted on sleeping in the same room as the babies. She didn't trust the unfamiliar comfort. She didn't trust silence. She kept asking for a nightlight, not for herself, but for the twins. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, James stayed up in his office, staring at the photo of Emily again. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder he hadn't touched in years. It held the last things he'd had from her, an old phone bill, a copy of a missing persons report he'd filed, a photo of them together before Lily was born. She had looked so full of life back then. Bright eyes. Bold laughter. He remembered how she used to dance barefoot in the living room. How she used to draw little hearts on Lily's lunchbox napkins. He wondered when all of that had disappeared. Had it happened slowly, day by day, or had she just broken all at once? Then, tucked deep inside the folder, he found something he hadn't noticed before. A small envelope with his name written on it in her handwriting. James. His fingers shook slightly as he opened it. The letter was short. Just a few lines. But every word sliced through him. I'm sorry I'm doing this to you. I'm not okay, James. I haven't been for a long time. I know I should tell you, but I can't. I'm ashamed. I don't want Lily to see me like this. I don't want you to see me like this. You don't deserve this version of me. If you're reading this, I failed to make it right. I just hope someday you can forgive me. The date was 6 months ago. Which meant she had planned to leave long before she actually disappeared. James sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in his hand. He didn't cry, not exactly. But something cracked open inside him, a deep, old grief that had never been given a proper place to land. He had lost her once. And now, if they didn't find her soon, he might lose her again, this time for good. But this time, he wasn't going to stop searching. This time, he wasn't going to wait. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, though it was unlike anything James Harper had ever known. The man who once flew between time zones without thinking twice, who lived on coffee, boardroom adrenaline, and high-stakes deals, now woke up to bottle-feed 2 infants and coax a guarded 6-year-old into eating breakfast. His mornings were spent in pajamas, not suits. Instead of reviewing contracts, he learned how to measure formula, soothe colic, and locate pacifiers in the middle of the night. And still, in between diapers and lullabies, a silent, gnawing question clung to the back of his mind: where was Emily? Lily spoke more now, but only in small pieces. She remained watchful, her every move anchored to the well-being of her brothers. She still insisted on sharing their room, still flinched slightly when someone knocked on the door too loud, still hesitated whenever James offered too much. He didn't take it personally. He understood that trust, for Lily, had become something like a myth, something she wanted to believe in but had no real reason to. One evening, after the twins had finally settled and the apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen, James found Lily sitting alone on the floor of the nursery. Her knees were pulled to her chest, and she was holding a small stuffed bear that one of the hospital nurses had given her. She didn't notice him at first. Her eyes were fixed on the carpet, unmoving. He approached slowly, lowering himself to the floor beside her without saying a word at first. She didn't shift or back away, but her shoulders tensed just slightly. "Do you ever miss her?" she asked, her voice flat, almost too casual, like she was asking about the weather. James didn't answer right away. He looked at the bear, at the dim nightlight casting shadows across the wall, at the girl who was trying not to feel too much. "I miss her every day," he said finally. But I miss the version of her that smiled. The one who used to draw on napkins and sneak extra cookies into your lunchbox. I think maybe, that version of her went missing a long time ago. Lily didn't say anything for a while. Then she asked, do you think she meant to leave? Or did she just get tired? James turned to her, hearing the heaviness in her words, the adult sadness of someone far too young to carry it. I think she was very sick, he said softly. Not in a way you can see, like a cold. But in her mind. Her heart. Sometimes people carry pain so heavy, they don't know how to ask for help. And when it gets too heavy, they run. Do you think she still loves me? Lily asked. Her voice cracked on the last word. James's chest tightened, and he reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know she does. I think leaving you was the hardest thing she ever did. But I think she believed it was the only thing she could do. And I think she was wrong. Lily didn't cry, but her bottom lip trembled slightly. Then she did something that surprised him. She leaned against his side, not fully hugging him, but resting there. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just let her stay there as long as she needed. That night marked a shift between them. James began involving Lily in more decisions, what to feed the twins, how to decorate the nursery, which bedtime story to read. And she responded. Slowly, carefully, she started acting more like a child than a caretaker. She even laughed once, really laughed, when one of the babies spit up on James's shirt during a feeding. It was the kind of sound that made his eyes sting unexpectedly. Meanwhile, James had hired a team of investigators, sparing no expense to find Emily. He wanted to believe she was still alive, that she could be found before it was too late. He had someone combing through shelters, hospitals, street footage, and even the online corners where people went when they had no identification and nowhere left to run. Every night, he updated Lily with whatever he knew, careful not to make promises he couldn't keep. He told her only the truth, when they had a lead, when they didn't, when he felt hopeful and when he didn't. She appreciated that more than false reassurances. Then, on the 11th day since Lily had walked into his life again, the phone call came. It was past midnight. The apartment was quiet. James had just finished cleaning the kitchen and was about to turn in for the night when his phone buzzed. He answered immediately, recognizing the number. We found her, the voice on the other end said. A woman matching Emily's description was admitted to a county hospital 2 hours ago. She was picked up in bad condition, but stable. She gave her real name at intake. She's asking for her daughter. James barely heard the rest of the words. He was already grabbing his keys, his mind racing. He thought about waking Lily, but then he paused. What if Emily wasn't ready? What if she changed her mind? What if she saw her daughter and couldn't handle it? He called Dr. Evans first, asking her to meet him there. Then he left a note for Lily, just in case she woke up, and headed out into the night. At the hospital, the halls were cold and sterile. Nurses led him to a private room at the far end of the recovery wing. Emily lay there, pale, thin, her eyes sunken, her hair tangled around her face. But when she looked up and saw him, her expression cracked open in a way he hadn't seen in years. There was pain there, and shame, but also relief. I didn't think you'd come, she whispered. I never stopped looking, he said. She reached for his hand with shaking fingers, and in that moment, he saw not the woman who had left, but the woman who had once danced barefoot in his kitchen. Broken, yes. But not gone. I want to see her, Emily said. I want to see Lily. If she'll let me. James nodded slowly. We'll take it one step at a time. But he knew, deep in his chest, that this was the beginning of another kind of return. Not just for Emily, but for all of them. James didn't bring Lily to the hospital right away. After seeing Emily that night, weak but lucid, trembling but coherent, he knew rushing the reunion would do more harm than good. Emily herself had asked for time. She wanted to see Lily more than anything, but she was terrified that her daughter would look at her with hatred, or worse, pity. James understood. The woman lying in that hospital bed was a shadow of the Emily he had known, but somewhere beneath the exhaustion and regret, he saw the flickers of the woman who had once loved fiercely and laughed easily. He saw a mother who had fallen, but who was trying, desperately, to stand back up. Over the next few days, James visited Emily regularly. He brought photos of the children, updates from the pediatrician, and drawings Lily had made. He didn't tell Lily yet that her mother had been found, not until he was sure Emily was truly stable, physically and mentally. Each time he sat by her hospital bed, she asked about Lily, about the twins, about what they ate, how they slept, whether they still cried at night. She cried when she saw the picture of Daniel curled up on a soft blanket, holding his brother's hand in his sleep. She cried harder when she saw Lily's shaky attempt at writing her name in crayon, the letters uneven but full of quiet strength. "I abandoned them," Emily whispered during one visit, unable to meet his eyes. "I thought I was protecting them from me, but I left them to suffer. I told myself you were better off without me, but I lied. I was scared, James. I didn't know how to be the person you both needed me to be. I broke inside, and then I let it spread to everything around me." James didn't pretend to understand all of it. He didn't offer easy forgiveness. But he listened. He stayed. And in doing so, he gave her what she needed most, someone who didn't run. When he finally told Lily that her mother had been found, he sat beside her on the floor of the nursery, the twins sleeping nearby, and explained everything carefully. He didn't lie. He didn't soften it too much. He told her that her mother had been sick, and afraid, and that she had made choices that hurt people, but that she wanted to see her now, if Lily wanted to. Lily didn't say anything at first. She looked down at her knees, her fingers picking at a loose thread on her pajama pants. Then she whispered, "Is she still sick?" James nodded gently. "Not like before. But she's still healing." Lily looked up at him then, her blue eyes searching his face. "Will she leave again?" "I don't think so," he answered honestly. "But I can't promise what the future holds. I can promise she loves you. That she never stopped." Lily didn't cry. She didn't jump up or run out the door. Instead, she sat there in silence for a long time. And then, finally, she said, "Okay. I want to see her. But only if the babies come too." James smiled softly. "Of course." The reunion happened 2 days later in a private hospital room filled with too much sunlight and too much emotion to fit into any single moment. Emily sat in a chair, a blanket over her lap, her hands clenched so tightly they trembled. Lily entered slowly, holding one car seat in each hand, her small arms straining under the weight, her jaw set in a line of quiet determination. James walked behind her, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of distress. Emily's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw her daughter. She stood, shakily, and took a single step forward, but stopped herself. Lily stared at her for a long time, saying nothing. Her face didn't show joy or anger or fear, it was blank, unreadable, as if her heart couldn't decide which emotion to land on first. Then she placed the car seats on the ground, unbuckled Daniel and David with practiced hands, and gently picked one up. She held him close, looked at her mother, and said simply, "This is Daniel. He's the one who cries a lot. David's the quiet one. He likes music." Emily's mouth trembled as she nodded, stepping closer. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Lily didn't answer right away. But after a moment, she handed Daniel to her mother. Emily took him as if he were made of glass, her arms unsure, her body shaking. The baby blinked up at her, then reached out one small hand to tug at her hair. That was all it took. Emily broke into silent tears, holding him like he was a lifeline. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, over and over, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry." Lily stood there, watching her mother cry, holding her other brother close to her chest. And finally, quietly, she said, "Okay." She didn't say, "I forgive you." Not yet. But the word "okay" was more than enough. It was permission. It was a start. The nurses gave them space. James watched from the doorway as his fractured family, tired, bruised, but still standing, took the first fragile steps toward becoming whole again. He didn't know what would come next. Therapy, probably. Hard conversations. Maybe even more setbacks. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that the hardest part was over. They had found each other again. And no one would be letting go this time. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it settled over the city like a promise. The trees along the avenue outside James's apartment bloomed with white blossoms that blew like snow whenever the wind shifted. Birds nested on windowsills, sunlight lingered longer across the hardwood floors, and for the first time in a long while, James felt like the air itself had softened. It had been 3 months since the day Lily walked into his life again. 3 months since he had held his daughter for the first time in years and whispered to her that she was no longer alone. So much had changed in those weeks that James sometimes forgot what his life used to be. His schedule no longer revolved around stockholders or development contracts. He no longer started his mornings with conference calls or closed his evenings with brandy and silence. Now, his days began with soft crying from the nursery and the smell of oatmeal burning slightly on the stove. Now, he ended his nights with storybooks, warm bottles, and quiet conversations with a little girl who still hadn't completely learned how to trust but who, slowly, was starting to try. Emily was released from the hospital after nearly 4 weeks of monitored care. She had moved into a private recovery facility not far from James's building, a place with quiet gardens and therapists who understood the damage that couldn't always be seen on scans. She and Lily met often, at first only with James present, then alone in short sessions, and eventually for entire afternoons in the nearby park. Their conversations were not always easy. Sometimes Lily said nothing at all. Sometimes she asked questions that Emily wasn't ready to answer. But there were also moments, soft, unexpected ones, when they laughed over ice cream or when Emily rocked David to sleep and hummed an old lullaby without realizing she remembered the tune. James never pushed. He gave them space, offered support, and made sure Lily always had the choice to step away if she needed to. What surprised him most was how Lily never did. She stayed. Even in her quietest moments, she showed up. She brought pictures she'd drawn to show her mother. She described the baby's different cries with the precision of someone who had studied them like a language. She once brought Emily a scarf James didn't know she'd kept from their old apartment, a faded thing with tiny yellow stars that used to belong to Emily, now clutched in Lily's small hands like a piece of something lost and found. The twins were thriving. With proper care and love, they had gained weight, found their voices, and learned to smile. They had different personalities, just as Lily had said. Daniel was loud, expressive, and impatient. David was quiet, observant, and calm. Watching them grow became the quiet heartbeat of every day in the Harper home. James, once terrified to hold a bottle correctly, had become a master of midnight feedings and diaper changes. His suits hung untouched in his closet. His boardroom had become the kitchen table, where he read fairy tales and taught Lily how to count in French just because she'd asked once. The apartment had transformed too. There were colorful drawings taped to the fridge, a high chair beside the dining table, baby blankets draped over the back of the leather couch. Lily's laughter echoed down the hallway now, sometimes joined by Emily's softer voice, sometimes by the twins' gurgling giggles. And somehow, all the space that had once felt so painfully empty now felt barely big enough to hold the noise and life it contained. James didn't return to work full-time. Instead, he delegated more, stepped back, and allowed his company to run without him constantly at the wheel. He realized, slowly and without regret, that he no longer needed the rush of power to feel alive. He had something far more fragile and infinitely more meaningful, a family. Not perfect, not simple, but real. One Sunday afternoon, the sun pouring through the windows, the smell of fresh bread in the air, James found Lily sitting on the balcony with a book open in her lap. She wasn't reading it. She was watching the sky, her eyes tracing the slow drift of clouds overhead. He stepped outside, crouched beside her, and said, "What are you thinking about?" She didn't answer right away. Then she looked at him, serious and thoughtful. "Do you think people can break and still come back together?" He nodded without hesitation. "Yes. I think they can come back even stronger." She looked away again. "Mom said she doesn't know if she deserves to come home. She says maybe she hurt us too much." James reached out, gently tucking a curl behind her ear. "It's not about what we deserve. It's about what we choose. We're choosing to build something new. Day by day." Lily nodded, slow and quiet. "I want her to come home. I think we're strong enough now." Later that week, Emily moved into the apartment. Not as a guest, not as someone visiting temporarily, but as part of the family. It was an adjustment, awkward at times, tender at others, but real. They carved out new routines. They created new memories. And they forgave, not in a single dramatic moment, but gradually, every day, with kindness and patience and small, steady gestures. One evening, as the whole family sat in the living room, James on the floor playing with the twins, Emily curled up with a book, Lily stretched across the couch drawing stars on a notepad, Lily looked up suddenly and said, "Dad?" James turned to her immediately. "Yeah, sweetheart?" She smiled, small but real. "I'm glad I found you." He stood, crossed the room, and wrapped his arms around her, gently but firmly, and whispered, "Me too. You saved all of us." Outside, the sky darkened. The city moved on as it always did, fast and loud, but inside the apartment, there was warmth, there was light, and there was love. The kind that didn't erase the past, but wove it into something stronger. Something whole. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by all the pieces of his once broken life, James understood what he hadn't before: some miracles don't come all at once. Some arrive in pieces, painful, beautiful, unexpected, and build themselves in silence until you look around one day and realize you're living inside one. This story, at its heart, is not just about reunion, it's about the quiet, painful process of healing. What moved me most wasn't the dramatic moment Lily appeared with the twins, or even the emotional reunion with Emily, but the slow transformation of each character. The way James let go of control to learn how to love. The way Lily, so young yet already shaped by loss, learned to trust again. And the way Emily, despite her deepest regrets, found the strength to come back and face what she had left behind. It's a story that doesn't pretend healing is easy or that forgiveness happens instantly. Instead, it shows that broken people don't need to be perfect to deserve a second chance. They just need to choose to try, again and again. The beauty of the ending isn't in its neatness, but in its truth. Family isn't about how it starts, or how far it falls apart, but about whether we're willing to rebuild it, even with shaky hands and scars. And in that, this story finds something rare, a happy ending that feels earned.